Okay, in this video we're going to create a circle view from our school performance grade data set that includes subgroups. So I'm going to start here by opening up the SPG data full file and go ahead and click to open that. And in this case, we are only going to use this file, so we don't need to worry about any linking or anything along those lines. And so when I open this up, take a quick look at my data again. Just as a reminder here, we have rows for each school. There is a single year that's associated with these data, and then we have a separate row for each subgroup. So each school in the data set has 10 different rows representing the different subgroups associated with that school and their performance. So we're going to go ahead and go into the worksheet. And for the visualizations that I'm going to go through today, I'm going to rely heavily on this Show Me tab. And this is particularly useful if we have a data set that we're not as familiar with, or if we're still trying to explore and figure out what we want to create. This is a good place for us to start. Now we're going to do a viz style that we have not yet done, and that is the circle view here. And as I see down below, I need one or more dimensions and one or more measures. And so I'm going to go ahead and take a few of our variables over here on the side. I know I want to have subgroup. I know I want to have the school name, so I'm going to control and click that. And then I also want the SPG score as my measure, so that's going to be a control click there as well. And notice over here on the Show Me, I have several options that now have lit up, and I'm going to use the circle view right here and go ahead and click that. Now, if you recall on here, whenever Tableau is going to default to one of these new visuals, oftentimes it's not going to look exactly the way that we want it. And in fact, in this case here, this is a little bit hard to read. I've got all 2,600 roughly schools included in this data set, and it's really hard to read and look across. You'll also notice here I have the same issues that I've faced before where I have multiple schools with the same name. Tableau is aggregating those together, and I want to make sure that I fix that. The way that we're going to fix it for this particular video is we're just going to focus on one LEA. So I'm going to take LEA name, and I'm going to drag it over to my filters. And this is a filter that I want to be fixed. So I'm not going to actually show it to the user. But I'm going to go ahead and select here Durham Public Schools. And I'm going to hit OK. And now I've fixed my issue here. My maximum school performance grade score is 100. But I have this horizontal view, and I want to switch that. There's actually a very fast way that we can use to switch the rows and the columns. And that is by going to this button up here. That basically says swap rows and columns, and you can also use the keyboard shortcut of Control+W. When I do that here, notice now I have a circle chart that displays each of my schools as a row, and I've got a circle that represents the school performance grade score for each of my subgroups. And this is a nice way to view performance across for various subgroups by individual school. And just like we've done before, if I mouse over here, I have this highlight selected items option for me, and I can click on one of these and look at each of these subgroups kind of as I go through. Now I'm also going to do a few things to make this plot a little bit easier to read. One, I'm noticing here that my school names are cut off as I go, so I'm going to mouse over just to the edge of where the school names are, where I get the double-headed arrow. I'm going to click and drag that over. Now I have that here. That was a little bit further than I wanted, so I can just click and drag that back. And I'm also going to make these rows a little bit taller. And so I'm going to make it about twice as tall by clicking and dragging again to spread those things out. Now I want you to go over here and take a look at the marks card. And if you notice here for a circle view, we get a default for this shape mark. And this is something that we have not yet encountered with our previous views. But now, since we have shape up here in our marks card, it also appears as an option here. And shapes are another way that we can produce a dimension of the data. And we're actually going to utilize this shape function to to show another dimension of our data. In that case here is the school performance grade. So again, the letter grade here we can bring over and add that as a shape. And I'm going to go ahead and add all of the members. So just like we've done with colors in the past, now we have another legend here that has a different shape associated with each grade. This is something where Tableau defaulted to a shape palette for us. So it selected these different pieces, but just like we've encountered in other situations, this is not a very intuitive look. A circle doesn't necessarily scream an A plus doesn't necessarily have a B, an X for a C. Those pieces don't necessarily make intuitive sense. So we want to change this shape palette to be something that makes a little bit more sense when you first glance at it. So one thing that we can do here is you can go over to the marks card and click on shape. And you'll notice here that we have the option to select a shape palette. And it's going to default to these particular shapes. But from here we can manually assign. So for example, if I click on A, I could manually assign this right-hand triangle, and I could do the same for the rest. But that doesn't really solve my problem with intuition. There's actually a palette in here that we can utilize, and I'm going to use this proportions palette. But you'll notice here for various other applications, you may find it useful to use some of these other pieces. And just as a note, if you have the full version of Tableau, you can actually upload your own shape palette in here to add to your visuals. We're going to use this proportions palette, and I want to assign different proportions that align to better results. So for the A, I'm going to choose the fully filled circle. For B, I'll use the 3/4 filled circle. For C, I'll use half. For D, I'll use only 1/4 filled. And then for an F, I'll have an open. And I'll actually keep the Alt and the I as these other shapes to show that these are things that are outside of the standard A through F grading scale. And when I click OK here, I see that I can more easily visualize when I have a C versus a D versus over to here where I have A's for some of my subgroups. I'm going to add a few more features as well. One, this shape is a little bit difficult to see. So one way that I can change that very easily is just by going to size. And if I click on size here, I can click and drag that size over. I'm going to click and drag over to that second hash mark there. It's a little bit too big, so I'm going to go in the middle of my two hash marks. And that actually looks pretty good. Now I'm going to add two more pieces to this visual. One is I'm going to add a filter for my subgroups because this visual is a little bit busy. There's a lot going on here. It's really hard to focus on any particular subgroup. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to simply take my subgroup, click on it, right-click, and show the filter. That's going to be a user viewable feature. And instead of showing all of my subgroups, I just want to show a few. And so for the purposes of this visual, let's look at all students. I'll also look at my economically disadvantaged students, and let's also look at my English learners. And so for all the schools that actually have this subgroup, this is now showing up on my list. Now, one more feature I would like to add is if I have my subgroup and it's highlighted, that I actually want the school performance grade score to show up on my plot. And I can do that very easily by going over to Label, to show my mark labels to see, yes, that is the one that I want. And I'm going to change this to appear if it's highlighted. So it's going to default to show nothing. But as I go over here and I click on my All subgroup, it's then going to highlight and show that school performance grade score for that particular subgroup. Final thing here is I'm going to add a title that makes sense for this particular plot. And so I'm going to change it, instead of saying Sheet 1, I'm going to have my LEA name. Remember, we can insert a dynamic field by going to Insert and LEA name. And I'm going to have this be School Performance Grade Scores by Subgroup. and this is for the 2018-19 school year. So we now have a fully operational circle chart, and in the next video we are going to build on this by creating something called a crosstab.